All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. We are back for another episode of Chip Chat. This is our 7th episode. This is where me and Jose talk all about the world of semiconductors and chips. All of his Twitters and YouTubes are in the description, so you can check him out there. We got a lot of stuff to cover today. Intel, interesting stuff going on in the world of Intel.
Definitely.
And yeah, stocks down, Biden cutting certain subsidies. We got to talk about that. Taiwan semiconductors, horrible earthquake in Taiwan. Thoughts and prayers to the people of Taiwan. What impact does that have on semiconductors and TSMC? And then Tesla, a bunch of different things to talk about in the world of Tesla when it comes to AI and chips and potential GPUs that they're trying to get for FSD. Jose, what's going on, man? How are you doing?
Pretty good. Pretty excited. I feel like we haven't done this in forever, but I think it's only been like a week that we took off, and that was it.
Yeah, and literally it was because I was traveling last week to New Orleans, so we are back and we are doing it. Okay, let's get started with the Intel news. So a couple of components to Intel. The reason the stock is in a pretty tough situation right now is because of the fact that they come out with a piece of news, and that piece of news essentially is a new revision on their forward guidance for their Intel Foundry business, which basically told investors, hey, we're not going to be profitable until 2030, and our margins are going to take a little bit of a hit as we're beginning to try to figure out what we're going to need to do in order to get this ball rolling. So they went from about $46 to $40. On top of that, Biden canceled a couple of subsidies. That was about $2 billion of R&D funding for chips. Still gave Intel over $20 billion in subsidies over the past week, but there was a cancellation there a couple of days ago. So your thoughts on Intel's new revision of their guidance, and also the fact that they got a decent amount of money from Biden to build chips in America?
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting with that revision. I think the wording they used got investors a little tricky because I was reading the event yesterday, and previously when we looked at Intel and their foundry business, right? Intel's pretty much running two businesses at the same time. It's running its foundry business, which you can say is competition to TSMC, and then it's running its Intel Core products, which is their kind of fabless design, where you would compare it to a company like AMD. So Intel's foundry business, originally they say it was going to be at least break even by 2026, 2027. They never mentioned anything by the end of 2030. The end of 2030 was something new. But if you look at there real quick, it says that now they expect to be break even between now and the midway of 2030. So it seems like they're giving themselves a little bit more slack. And I think that's what investors are kind of worried about. It's like, hey, previously you didn't tell us that it was somewhere between now and 2030, even though it's roughly 2026 and 2027. But I think by changing this wording around, it kind of gives them it kind of Intel saying, hey, look, we might need a little bit more slack, so we're going to change our wording a little bit. And I think that's what has some investors worried right now.
Why do you think they're doing this? Do you think that like it's getting more competitive? Do you think they need more time? Like, why do you think they had to adjust this over the next couple of years?
Hopefully, it's just Intel being conservative. Obviously, on the worst case scenario, could be that Intel might be saying something negative that might come within the next few years that in the semiconductor space. So they're kind of brushing themselves or getting ready for that, because we know the semiconductor space is usually a little bit cyclical here and there with over inventory corrections. So on one end of the spectrum, it could be Intel being like, hey, look, we're preparing ourselves for the worst. On the other side, maybe Intel is just being a little bit conservative, just in case they might be a few quarters late, where Intel normally has been late for a lot of things. So they might just be preparing themselves for that as well.
Yeah, I agree. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the market interprets this, because Intel has been a stock that's been stuck between like 42 to 46 for a while. I mean, it was at 46 back in 2018. Yes, we had the big dip with COVID and all that stuff, but pretty much stayed at the same range. So I'll be interested to see if the market ends up buying this dip, because they're one of the only companies that's trying to build chips in the United States. Here's the CEO speaking about the CHIPS Act grants that they received from the Biden administration. And we'll talk a little bit more after we watch him talk.
Awarding Intel nearly $20 billion worth of grants and loans. That, of course, from the CHIPS Act. The company right now will receive $8.5 billion in grants, but could get as much as an additional $11 billion in loans. That would be to help it build out fab manufacturing, fab facilities here in the U.S. Let's bring in John Fort, because he has the man of the hour, Pat Gelsinger. John.
David, thank you. I am here in Chandler, Arizona with Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of Intel. Big day for you. Been waiting for this for a while. Chipchat funding, $8.5 billion. That's a lot of money, but shy of the $10 billion that some, maybe you, were hoping that you'd get. And then there was this DOD kind of $2.5 billion pullback headline. So tell me, with this funding now, what's this going to do for the timetable for you for getting Intel back to manufacturing leadership?
Well, we just say this is an exciting day for America. It's an exciting day for the CHIPS program. It's an exciting day for Intel. And you're behind us, the construction project alive and well, and we're moving forward rapidly. And the facilities behind us, hey, these need to come online in 2025. You're able to be part of our 18A, our finish of our getting back to leadership. So this brings us back to leadership manufacturing for some of our key products. Also will be key for our foundry business as well. And it really is sort of the coming together of everything that we did. A lot of shoe leather, getting the CHIPS Act passed, and the $8.5 billion, the additional $11 billion of loan guarantees, the investment tax credit, and then more to come with defense and the R&D investments. So today's a great day. It sort of is, I'll call it the end of the beginning of our journey to rebuild semiconductors in America. This is exciting.
What's coming with defense? What kind of timetable should we be looking on?
No particular time.
So that's the core part I wanted to talk about. Intel, in your opinion, is probably one of the only companies out there that's actually trying to build chip manufacturing in the States, right?
There's also TSMC. TSMC is trying to build here in Arizona. I believe it's Arizona as well. But it does seem like TSMC is only doing it because they're getting that pressure from their customers to kind of expand into other regions. It does seem like TSMC is favoring Japan a little bit more in forms of building fabs. They're building some fabs in Japan. To me, Intel is the only one that's really, really focused and really wants to build out here in the United States. And I do believe it's a great move for them because of all the incentives that we're getting. But also they're building in Europe, where they're giving the European Chips Act and other types of loans that they're receiving from other types of governments at the same time.
Yeah, guys, if you have any questions, we'll get to Q&A at the end. So any questions at all about anything, markets, semiconductors, all that stuff, you can leave it in the comments and we'll get to it at the end. The other thing about Intel that I think is really interesting is that it has a vision for what the next 10 years could look like. That's a little bit more advanced because they've been around since like the dot-com bubble. And it seems like they're kind of trying to realize this AI boom into that vision. Having said that, Dell, I just want to touch on that a little bit. That's up 9% over the past couple of days. They announced on their earnings, hey, we're kind of getting into this SMCI server rack business when it comes to GPUs. Are you at all interested in Dell? And do you think they're a serious player here, or do you think they're just saying it to get the market to be excited about them?
No, Dell's definitely a serious player here when it comes to providing data center servers. I mean, if you watch GTC event, Jensen actually called out Dell's CEO, I believe, during the event. And I wasn't personally there, but there were some tweets going around that Jensen was at the Dell's kind of booth, kind of really promoting it. So it seems like they do have a pretty cool partnership. And we've seen that NVIDIA is really working on kind of helping these server rack makers get to the market a lot faster. So anybody they partner with is definitely going to take maybe some of the advantages that Supermicro might have had in the past. So I like I mentioned in previous episodes, the server business, this hardware business is not one I normally would invest in, but Dell is definitely a player in that space if you're looking for one.
Yeah, Dell's exciting. I mean, I'm probably not investing in them yet. I mean, it's up 75% year to date. Might have missed a bit of the run. If you knew about Dell before this pop happened, you did very well. But it is very interesting to see a resurgence of a company that was basically left for dead for the past 5-7 years because of AI, because they figured out, hey, this is a way our ecosystem, our technology can manifest itself in some capacity in the sort of investor interest around AI. And then they started providing real products and services, and investors are excited about that. TSMC. Earthquake in Taiwan definitely was intense. From my understanding, TSMC has not been affected, or the factories have not been affected by that. What are your thoughts on the earthquake and what it means for TSMC in general?
Well, like you mentioned at the beginning, obviously the first thing one should think about is hopefully everybody is okay. Second thing, if you're a semiconductor investor, you start to worry maybe, hey, how does this impact the overall business in general? And like you mentioned, it seems like TSMC just had like a day to shut down to make sure all their tools are okay, which makes perfect sense. I think they kind of suspended some. They're also building fabs over there, so they kind of halted construction, I guess, until they do more of a more thorough inspection on the buildings as well. But I think this is gonna, if I may, it kind of goes back to the previous topic we were just talking about Intel. I think this goes back in Intel. It gives Intel the ability to go to the White House or go to the governments, other governments, and say, hey, look, what if a bigger earthquake would have happened in Taiwan? Why don't you give us more money so we can build even more? So you don't even have to worry about that. So this things like this just remind us that, hey, look, at the end of the day, the semiconductor in forms of advanced chips are really, really dependent in that one region right now. So, like I mentioned, I think Intel can use this as a fuel to maybe try to squeeze out a little bit more money because we're the dependency we have in that space at the moment.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, 97% of chips, I was listening to this today, are built in Taiwan. So, from a geopolitical perspective, your argument here is that a lot of these American companies should be going to the government and saying, if Taiwan, if TSMC was affected by a natural disaster that no one can control, like an earthquake, we would like, how screwed do you think we would be if TSMC had to shut down for like a month?
And this is, I think, one of the biggest bearish thesis for semiconductors. Everybody who hates on semiconductors say, hey, look, you're dependent on TSMC. But if TSMC was to shut down, I think we would see a whole stock market collapse. And not just in the semiconductor space, because at the end of the day, who's running the stock market right now? It's your Apple, it's your Microsoft. Where does Apple get their chips for their phones, for their tablets? They're gonna hold production on. They're not going to be able to have any form of inventory for their phones or laptops. So you're going to see any form of tech really kind of see a big dip. So if I was worried about Taiwan, I think I would just never invest in any tech space and just focus on maybe oil or whatever else people invest in that don't invest in tech.
No, it's a good point. I mean, like it is a big bear thesis, dude. If Taiwan's screwed, the entire world is screwed. That is the investment risk you're taking. But the reward, if you are right on what TMC can ultimately become, is you're betting on the tech sector, and that tech sector is probably going to do a lot better than some of the other sectors, as you said, like oil. Let's get an update on that earthquake. So we'll take a look at this, and then we'll keep talking from here.
For TSMC.
Yeah, I mean, what they've done is come out and really reassure people that, yes, this isn't great. Yes, there's been an impact, but it's still within the bounds of what we can fix and fix quickly given our contingency plans. So there will be some wafers lost. There will be a bit of manufacturing loss, but not the kind of months of disruptions that we've seen in the distant past and with other supply chain disruptions that we saw during the pandemic.
Just give us the context a little bit of just how integral Taiwan, TSMC, players like Foxconn as well, when it comes to phones and laptops are to the global economy, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, everything goes through TSMC. If it's the processor in your iPhone designed by Apple, it's made by TSMC. If it's the supercomputer in a data center based on a chip from NVIDIA, that's going through TSMC. If it's a modem that's allowing your phone to connect to a network, that's Qualcomm. That's going through TSMC. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Everybody depends on them.
Okay, let's talk about what else is operational on the ground in Taiwan. I was interested to read about Micron's footprint, for example, Ian. There's a lot that happens there. We're talking about semiconductor manufacturing, but it's also at the circuit board level, the context of laptops and PCs. What other names are impacted, and which areas of the technology economy should we look out for?
Yeah, I mean, historically, Taiwan was an absolute center of effectively assembly of electronic devices. A lot of that has moved to mainland China, so it's not as crucial as it used to be in that area, but there are still a lot of technology companies that work for the sort of better, well-known names like Dell, like HP, that also operate in Taiwan. And as you mentioned, Micron, that's memory chips. Memory chips are really important as well for your PC, for your smartphone.
And there is notable reaction across competitors right now. When you're looking at the rest of the chip stocks. I'm looking at the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index. Most are in the green, Micron leading it, Broadcom, Lam Research. But actually, there's an interesting exception. And you would have thought Intel, a rival, would have done well out of the back of any supply chain headaches for rivals, but not so today.
Yeah, this is an unfortunate kind of consequences that any bad news for TSMC should be good news for what Intel is trying to do, which is effectively become a competitor for TSMC. It should have people saying, hey, we need to diversify geographically. Who can we do that with? Well, here's Intel. But because of some of the financial disclosures that Intel put out there last night, that unfortunately, at least in terms of Intel stock price, is not the case.
Ian.
Jose, do you think TSMC is attractive at these prices in this 140 range, or it's run up a lot this week and you should be cautious?
You know, my investment style is maybe a little bit, I don't know if it's, I don't think it's weird actually. I want to beat the overall semiconductor market, right? I want the companies that I invest to outperform the semiconductor ETF, because if not, what's the point? Might as well just invest in the semiconductor ETF.
Right.
I think TSMC is such a big company and is such an important company that pretty much just mirrors and is pretty much the kind of the driver or the leader of the semiconductor ETF. So I personally just wouldn't invest in TSMC. If I was to invest in TSM, I would just invest in the semiconductor ETF, because I'm pretty sure if we take a closer look, I don't know if you can in here, but take a closer look at maybe like the returns of TSM versus SMH in a period of time, I would guess they're very similar in forms of percentage wise, because I would just say TSMC very much is going to follow the overall semiconductor market because it pretty much creates the semiconductor market.
Yeah, let's do some math. So we got 239 minus 82. This is from the October 2022 lows divided by 82. So SMH is up 191% since the October lows. And then TSM, since the October lows, this is going back to 2022. We got 142 minus 57 divided by 57. TSM is 149% up. So it's actually a little bit underperforming, basically at the same level, right? With SMH, it was at 157, it was a bit higher. So yeah, it does make sense. At the end of the day, you got to get something that outperforms, and that is the justification for picking just an individual stock. Okay.
Yeah, let me just share my screen real quick. I think I'm able to show it a little bit different. Share screen. Let me do entire screen here. So here we have SMH and TSM. So this is overall returns in the past 5 years. You can see SMH has returned, and total returns does include the amount you would pay on form of a ETF if you have to pay some form of fee. It also includes dividend yields. So in the 5 years, SMH outperforms. In the 3 years, SMH has outperformed. In the past year, we're going to see SMH continues to outperform. So for those reasons, there is the possibility that TSM is definitely going to be a great investment, but I just don't believe the chances of it outperforming the semiconductor market is high. And for that reasons, I tend to not invest. And hopefully that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Guys, we'll talk about the market sell-off. I know you guys are asking about it in the chat. We'll just do Tesla, and then we'll talk about that at the end. And then any questions at all, we'll get to those as well. Tesla. Okay, so we definitely should touch on the improvements of Tesla from a FSD perspective, and also what it means in the context of automotive semiconductor companies, which NVIDIA talked about at the GTC conference. So what are your thoughts right now on what Tesla is doing, and obviously this FSD rollout that's happened over the past couple of weeks?
So in forms of Tesla, right, obviously right now, this is pretty much a company that's dependent on car sales. I am a shareholder of Tesla, and as you saw from my message, I think on Monday I did buy the Tesla. I think it was Monday, right? Or Monday or Tuesday, I forget what day it was.
I think you got it like 162-ish, around that range.
Yeah, so I ended up adding to my position on the Tesla dip that we saw during the output numbers. Yeah.
Yep.
Delivery numbers. I personally, and again, this might just be me being weird, but I see Tesla being a huge AI company. I mean, their FSD version 12 is insane. the amount of data that they're collecting from here and they're going to be able to install into their Optimus robot is also intense. So right now, this is a company that has a nice amount of data, but in the short term, I think we're going to have the bears making fun of all the Tesla bulls as long as we continue this kind of high interest rate time, as long as we continue this high pressure on the EV market and on the vehicle market. I think in the long term, if you're patient, Tesla has the potential to provide some crazy returns.
Yeah, FSD has been really interesting, right? FSD has been really interesting because they produce pretty bad delivery numbers. We saw delivery numbers that were 387,000. That's the lowest it's been in the past 2.5 years. Market tanked, right? Down 8%. Stock's at 173. It's like couple bucks down from where it was before the delivery numbers came out, which seems to signal to me that if the market's not willing to get Tesla to go down to that 150, 140 range that a lot of the bears think is very possible, and the bulls would love to get those prices. But if that doesn't happen, then what's going to take it down? Because you're paying 30% less than you were at the start of the year for a company that, yes, is struggling on deliveries, but we think that's more interest rates related versus like fundamentally related, but is phenomenally improved this core AI offering, which is FSD. So is your bull thesis right now on Tesla and buying it primarily for the FSD, or is there something else that got you to buy the dip at 162?
So for me, it's just the data that they have for AI solutions, which obviously include for the FSD. But I believe that data will be able to transfer not easily, but we'll be able to transfer to the Optimus robot as well. And we have seen from Tesla that they are a manufacturing machine. So if the robotics market turns into a manufacturing war, I think Tesla will be able to do that pretty well. And I also was one of those delivery numbers this quarter for the Tesla. And I want to say the vehicle is amazing. It drives within itself, even though the car itself is not the reason I'm bullish for. They definitely do make some great cars.
Yeah, no, I think that's very exciting. I think that's why the market's buying it up right now in the context of FSD. In the context of NVIDIA and what they're doing for automotive semiconductor companies, we talked a little bit last week, but we didn't get super deep into it around what NVIDIA announced at GTC for different automotive companies in the semiconductor space. So the question here is, do you think Tesla just kind of goes all in when it comes to NVIDIA? Because FSD needs to be out like now, especially with the stock tanking. And they don't, I think, have the time to build out their own massive infrastructure. It makes more sense to just be using NVIDIA. And then does the implication of that, which Elon said last night, that we're going to license FSD to everybody else, if you're going to do that, you need a lot of NVIDIA GPUs. So does that ultimately come back down to NVIDIA and what they're doing in the automotive space?
Yeah, so obviously, right, Tesla has their dojo, and then last earnings, they Elon called it kind of I forget, a super shot, a rare shot. I forget what was the exact term he used, but pretty much like a low rate of success. I think I've talked about it in this channel before, where I think the main reason he calls it a low chance of success is just because the competition in NVIDIA, in this case, in forms of developing high performance and AI chips, is growing so quickly that it might just make more sense to focus in there right now. And Tesla has mentioned they've been a big customer of NVIDIA for the H100. They just, unfortunately, because of supply chain issues, they can't get all the chips that they need. And because of that reason, they try to optimize with their own dojo platforms. So I think Elon knows that NVIDIA is producing the best chips. I'm going to continue to believe that Elon's going to continue to buy the H100 or the Blackwell 200. What I'm really curious to see if Elon does is if he goes back to NVIDIA, and I think we talked about this, NVIDIA's hardware for the in-vehicle machine, because NVIDIA has their Thor drive, which is their processing unit that goes inside the cars. Obviously, Tesla has their own self-made chip there, but I would be curious to see if Tesla in the near future changes back to NVIDIA. And if they do that, I don't believe it's a sign of weakness. I believe is Elon saying, hey, look, I know they're doing it better, and it's going to make more sense for us to go in that direction instead.
Okay, so I'm curious on your perspective on this, because you are more technical and math empirical based versus like sort of politics. Ross Gerber said the reason Tesla's down is because Elon's tweeting about politics. Do you agree with that? Do you think him tweeting about the border is why stock's down 30%?
I definitely don't think that, and I don't think that's why the numbers in car sales are down. anybody who's driven that I know that drives a Tesla, I've never heard them say the reason, or people that don't have a Tesla, I've never heard them say, hey, the reason I'm not getting a Tesla is because Elon is tweeting about this or that or this. So, I mean, I think it all depends, I guess, on what circle of people you might surround yourself with. But in my circle, I've never seen it in the first perspective. I've heard it from people in Twitter, but from a first perspective, I've never seen that occur.
And have you used FSD or no?
Yes, I actually right now with Elon giving it for a month for free. My wife, who I want to say she's not anti-tech, but she's very hesitant to try new technology, especially something as crazy as FSD. And she tried it by herself first, and then she tried it on her hour-long commute on Monday, and she loves it. I think I tested it either Tuesday or Wednesday, and I think it's insane. Unfortunately, I can't compare how version 11 is to version 12, but version 12, I don't think I had any hiccups where I needed to take control. It was more just me not feeling, I guess, completely comfortable, but it did seem like the car was doing the right thing. I just maybe hesitated a little bit and wanted to take control back just because I was like, hey, I still don't trust you. Maybe let me take control here.
How long was the road trip?
For me, I was just going to my parents' house. So it was like a 20-25 minute round trip. Like I said, my wife, she has a 1 hour commute one way. So for her she used it 2 hours, pretty much for 2 hours long.
Okay. And you guys aren't paying for it yet, right? You got it from the free trial, right?
Yeah. So right now you get the free trial version. And one thing that my wife texted me on the way there, she was like, after this, I don't think I would mind paying for the monthly subscription.
So that's what I was going to ask. And anyone in the chat can answer as well. So do you think $200 a month, it's 12,000 in totals over 5-6 years, would you be willing to pay that? I'm not paying $200 a month, dude. That's too much money.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it all depends on where you're at, on I guess what you spend your money in. At the moment, I would say I don't know what else to do when I'm not driving and sitting at the driver's seat, so I might as well just not pay for it. But maybe once I get creative and maybe get the Apple Vision Pro so I can do some computer stuff while driving, then maybe I might do it there. But I don't think the price is too much of a hurdle. It's just me not knowing what to do with when I'm using it. It's like, am I just sitting there? Might as well just be driving right now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been publicly saying I'm a little scared of FSD, and I wouldn't want to just be in there while the car is doing its thing. That anxiety will probably leave over time. And then, maybe $200 a month might be worth it if I'm driving a lot. But if you're not driving a lot of it, like a couple of years ago, I used to drive like 120 miles a day back and forth for work. And so that's when I would have loved it. But now it's like, I don't really need it. So $200 a month is a lot. Maybe like $50 a month and a smaller version of that would be better. But it's going to be interesting because that's going to be like 95% margins, right? Every car, you can lose money on the car and still make a crazy margin if people are paying for FSD. And I think Elon said this a couple quarters ago, that the difference between Tesla being worth a lot and a little and zero, he said, is FSD. So if they figure that out, I mean, there's going to be a lot of opportunities in the world.
I do like that subscription base because, like, let's say my wife and I with our child, we do take a few road trips here and there. And I would say if we did like a 10-hour drive, I wouldn't mind paying the $200 just for that 1 month where we're going to use it back and forth for that road trip. So I think with the subscription, it gives me the opportunity to, hey, give Elon the 95% margin for at least a month or two.
Right. 100% agreed. Before we go to Q&A and everyone can put in their questions in the chat, I want to show you one more story because this is not a chip company, but this was hilarious. It does have to do with AI a little bit. I don't know if you heard about this one. Amazon's just walkout technology. So this is tech where you can go into a Whole Foods and like just pick up whatever you want and leave. And the whole idea was AI was kind of monitoring what you pick up, and then they were automatically charging your Amazon balance. Apparently, they had 1,000 contractors in India acting as virtual cashiers that would stare at whatever you pick throughout the store and then would manually enter that into the cart on the website and then like check out for you. And this is being replaced now by shopping carts with scanners because obviously you can't keep paying people in India to do this. Any thoughts on just what that means for us trying to really innovate in AI and maybe just not getting there yet?
I don't know. I think that's hilarious. It makes sense because I saw a tweet earlier today that Amazon's cloud compute is just someone on India just working out the data. So now that makes sense of why they tweeted that. I think that's crazy. I mean, I think I mean, AI is evolving. I don't. I see AI moving in all types of technologies, in all types of markets. I know there's this AI company that's using NVIDIA's for their healthcare venture, where about for $9 an hour you can have an assistant nurse to some extent, where they call back. And I mean, I think we're going to continue to see chatbots like that, and other types of AI solutions. So I'm pretty excited for the overall tech market.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to bring that story up is because a lot of times we talk about AI automating workers and replacing them. This is one of those examples where the companies are realizing, wait a second, we can't just replace these people that quickly because the technology isn't fully there yet to get rid of these employees. So it probably will happen over time, but it's not exactly there yet in certain circumstances. And then so we're seeing some momentum with employees having the ability to not be replaced fully yet. Okay, cool. So we'll get into Q&A and get through a bunch of topics. First of all, why is the market tanking? There's one thing you guys need to know about the market tanking, and it's what I tweeted about 10 minutes ago, which is this dude right here, Jose. I don't know if you keep up with this guy too much, but he is Neil Kashari. He is one of the 12 presidents of the Fed. That's what he actually looks like. He's a very interesting guy when he's on TV talking. He just said, I don't know where he said it, probably CNBC, Bloomberg, somewhere, some conference, the Fed might not cut rates if inflation is sticky, and then the market tanked. So for those that are wondering, why is the market down? Yes, this one man has that power. He is one of the people who vote on if the Fed cuts rates, raises rates, or keeps them the same. So this is one of 12 people that has a very sophisticated amount of power when it comes to the Fed making decisions. And if he thinks, hey, we're not going to cut, even though Jay Powell, the chair, said we're going to cut 3 times, the market's going to negatively react, which is just insane that they're reacting to this guy over what the Fed chair said yesterday at Stanford at a conference. But nonetheless, that's why the market's down. So if you're curious, that's what's happening. Okay, questions here. So AMD, question for you, Jose. Why is AMD trading sharply down? Maybe you don't know anything that's happening today, but in general, why do you think AMD has suffered a little bit over the past week?
I think AMD is one that's getting a little bit too excited for their AI chips. Obviously, the MI300 is out and they're getting some interesting numbers, but we know that for AMD, the MI300 is going to be just a base. 2024 is just going to be a base year for them for the AI market. So I think maybe investors right now are saying, hey, look, maybe we got a little bit too ahead of ourselves. We have to wait a few more earnings before we really start to see this growth from the AI market. So I think that's what's happening with AMD. I think compared to NVIDIA, looking at forward PE ratios, AMD is trading much higher than NVIDIA at the moment. So maybe some investors might be saying, hey, might as well just invest in the top dog instead.
Yeah, so I mean, you think that at 224, it ran up a little too quickly. And the reason it ran up is because people were chasing NVIDIA. They didn't want to invest in NVIDIA at 900.
Oh, I thought you meant overall. So I thought you meant in the overall from the stock. I think it peaked at around 180, 190 a few weeks ago. From today, I don't know anything that might be concerning in forms of AMD at the moment.
Gotcha. Eric Wood says AMD used TMC's more advanced processes to slap Intel around a bit with the Zen series, though Intel is still managing to compete. I expect these investments to put Intel in the lead eventually. Do you agree? Do you think that could get Intel ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think Eric makes a great point, right? AMD has been using TSMC, who's been ahead in leadership in technology. Yet when you kind of go into the PC market or the server market or the laptop market, you still see Intel's chips there that are technically weaker. So now with all these investments and Intel really focusing, I think it could be a little bit more competitive pressure back on AMD from the blue giant. And that's me saying that AMD is my second biggest position, and I'm bullish in the overall company. But I believe Intel can definitely come out with some strong competition.
Do you think Intel could actually capture investors' excitement like AMD has, though? Like Pat Gelsinger is not a Lisa Su.
Yeah, I think one way they can is Intel does have an AI chip. It's called the Gaudi AI accelerator, and they are going to announce a little bit more about it next week. It has a Vision event, I believe April 8th, and they did mention they're going to show a little bit more information about Gaudi 3. So if they show a lot of information and not just a quick tease, I think some investors could get excited with Intel's AI product.
Okay. Last question of the day. Again, thank you everybody for being here. Jose's Twitter and YouTube in the description, so please make sure to subscribe to him for more semis, stocks, content. Why is TMC, that we talked about today, not trading even higher if all these companies are dependent on them? I think it's a worthwhile question. NVIDIA is the granddaddy. We know everyone is relying on them. If Taiwan had an earthquake that actually affected TMC's factories and TMC went under, the entire world would collapse, as you said. So why isn't the market giving even a bigger premium to TSMC?
Thing.
You there? Did I freeze or did you freeze?
I don't know. Am I back? Are you back?
You're
Are we
back. You're good. You're good. You're good. Go ahead.
All right.
You got it.
So that's a really great question, right? Because we see NVIDIA is selling so many chips and is seeing such a huge growth in stock price. And everybody's saying, hey, Jose, why is TSMC not seeing that same type of growth? Unfortunately, and I'm not trying to disrespect TSMC at all. TSMC at the end of the day is just a manufacturing company. Obviously, they are pretty much a monopoly in that space, but while they might increase the price of their manufacturing up by maybe 5-10%, depending on the cost of technology, they will never be able to increase the cost by like 100% like NVIDIA is doing. So I think TSMC, while it does have price action, just like any manufacturing company, is more dependent on just the manufacturing line. So I just don't believe it has the true wide range of pricing power like a company like NVIDIA or anybody else that designs some crazy chips, because it's just, hey, look, we need your foundry line, we need your manufacturing line. Sure, you're going to give us a 10% increase, but it's not really going to do much compared to all the other manufacturing stuff that you end up making down the line.
And manufacturing, the margins there are not amazing, right? I mean, it's good, but it's...
Yeah, I mean, I forget what margins TSMC runs on, but usually the more advanced the chips are, the lower the margins are, just because it starts off. And just like anything in manufacturing, right? Once you've run it for a long time, the investments become a little bit weaker, your margins start to increase. If you have more products running in that same manufacturing line, again, you're able to see margin expansion. But right now, NVIDIA chips, even though they're selling at such huge amount of money, the actual volume compared to every other chip out there, the chips that go on the phone, the chips that go on tablets and everything, that volume is so small compared to that huge volume of every other chip out there in the world.
Got it. Oh, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And eventually we'll see how important the market really thinks TSMC could be if Intel really does compete in a significant way. As Swift says in the chat, man has done his homework. He absolutely has indeed. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This was fun. Chip Chat, episode number 7. We'll be back next week with updates on what's going on in the world of semiconductors. Jose's Twitter and YouTube is here, so please make sure to follow him. And we'll see you guys next week. I'll be live for the market close in about 45 minutes. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Peace out.